Good morning and welcome to Real Estate Radio Denver, the most informative hour of radio over the weekend. And we're here every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Tom Souther. And Real Estate Radio Denver is dedicated to building Denver's housing and credit marketplace. We're here to give you that timely truth about Denver's real estate, mortgage, and credit and financial marketplace that we don't feel you're getting from the national news outlets, and quite often not the locals either. So we help to rebuild that marketplace. We do it one home at a time by giving you some great advice, a little education, and we connect you with professionals that can help you, whether that's buying or selling your home. Maybe you've got a credit situation, need some financial tips. And today we've got something new and different. We're going to talk a little bit about family law. We're going to talk about estate planning, how they relate to real estate. But before we get into that, I wanted to jump in and do a little bit of a market update. I also want to remind you, you can always reach us off air. That off air number is 720-515-1818, 720-515-1818. Leave us a message, send us a text. We'll get back to you with whatever question you've got. Let's start off. I've got two great guests. Let's get them introduced, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the market. It's been an interesting couple weeks rate-wise, and I'd love to get some takes on maybe how that's affecting what people are doing when they're looking to buy or sell. So I've got two great guests with me. I have one of my regular co-hosts and partners. I have Vivi Gloriod. She is a real estate agent. She's with Cherry Creek Properties. Vivi.
Hi, Tom.
Hey. Vivi focuses on the Denver marketplace, and I don't think anybody knows it any better. Right? Right.
Correct.
And Vivi does a lot of investment property purchasing with her customers. She is a property owner and investor, and really takes care of her customers, whether that's they're buying their forever home, their first home, or looking to invest. So she's a great partner, and I really recommend her services. Also, we have with us another person who has been on before, but we're bringing him on in a little different capacity this time. We have Andrew Stein. Andrew is an attorney. He is a associate with Colorado Legal Associates. Is that the correct term, Andrew?
That is correct, and thank you for having me, Tom.
And Andrew focuses on family law, and he does estate planning, and we're going to talk a little bit about some real estate issues, perhaps. So welcome to the show, Andrew. I'm glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
But let's jump into the market. Vivi, what is your take on what's going on with this Denver crazy marketplace? Have you ever seen a market like this before?
No, and it's I did some research last week and found that Denver is the second fastest market, second to San Francisco for days on market. So homes are just not staying on the market. Right now, on average, from list to close date, we're at 43 days on the market.
Which is incredible. So you got to figure how long are they on before they get an offer?
Right.
On average.
Yeah, and if they're priced well. No, not even 10 days. If they're priced well, 2 days, and they're under contract. And then, the only reason it's 43 days is because people aren't paying cash for the most part. They're smart getting loans because interest rates are low, although they are creeping up.
They're creeping up a little bit.
We are seeing that. Then the other interesting thing is I have investors who like to do fix and flips, and that's really getting eaten up. You can no longer go to the foreclosure auction and buy houses. A couple of years ago, I was at the foreclosure auction every week, purchasing different investments. What happened is Denver is the second most stable market in metro cities in the United States. And so what's occurring is we've got top hedge funds. The number one hedge fund in America is Blackstone, and they are sitting at our foreclosure auction buying everything. They're beating everyone out. And they don't. And
they're just overbidding. They have a representative there, says,
and they're buying it all.
You're bidding 50. I'm going to bid 55.
Right, and it's interesting because
so they're not buying those in bulk from. They're not going to the actual
No, they're sitting at the
investors.
they're sitting
They're
at the
going to
fort,
auctions.
yeah, and they're buying. But they're also, every short sale I put on the market, I've got a couple of investor guys that they put an offer on every single one of my short sales.
Wow.
And so there are those as well. But it's interesting at the foreclosure market, that's no longer a viable source for people to pick up a property and fix and flip it. And it's interesting because Denver's so stable, and unlike if you were to purchase in Vegas a couple years ago, you would have seen a 25% drop in value, and we didn't see that in Denver. We've been very consistent.
And that those not being available for investors still has a ripple down effect to the first-time home buyer or the regular home buyer
It does.
that thinks that people still think there's a deal out there for them. They're going to get that great foreclosure. They're going to get
Right.
Something that's just way below market.
Right. And, I would tell people out there that if you are looking in a particular area, you're going to, as a buyer, you're going to want to work with an agent that really knows that area.
Absolutely. Because I think, and I'm not a real estate agent here, I just play one here on the radio, but so many of those homes are often on the market before they're even on the market.
Oh, yeah. I have a great
those
listing.
Deals are getting done by the people who know that neighborhood,
Right.
and have people waiting for that neighborhood.
I've got a great fix and flip coming on the market August 1st because he has tenants in the house, and it's a house in Baker. I like Baker. But it's a great fix and flip opportunity. And so I've actually had over 10 investors call me when I put the sign up wanting to know if they could get in there. But if I'm not representing them, I'm like, you have to wait till August 1st. But I did get my investors in there to look at it, and they all want to write offers.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's good.
So, and that's a phenomenon that we're seeing as well, is we're seeing signs going up, but they're not for sale signs. They're coming soon signs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, now I really like to get, as soon as the listing is signed, I get a sign in the yard, because a lot of times I'll have it sold before. Well, I never actually allow my sellers to sell their property until it's been properly marketed and on the market for 3 days, because I want highest and best. So I want multiple offers. I want to get them the highest dollar possible. But I often have a few offers prior to me even putting it on the market.
Actually in the MLS listing, of course. Yeah. And I think that's happening everywhere around town if they're priced correctly and you have a fantastic agent.
Right.
You're listening to Real Estate Radio Denver here on News Talk 710 KNUS. I've got two fantastic guests with me, Vivi Gloriod with Cherry Creek Properties and Andrew Stein from Colorado Legal Associates. And we've got a great show for you. We're going to talk about how the law affects your real estate purchases. Come right back. Don't miss a minute. Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Denver. I'm your host, Tom Souther, and we're talking about the market in Denver. And I have with me two guests. I have Vivi Gloriod with Cherry Creek Properties. She's a real estate agent, Denver real estate investor, and really just knows this market. And some interesting comments about how Denver is one of those top markets in the country, top places in the country where real estate is moving so quickly that it's pushing some people out. That's a little distressing, but I think the key to this right now, to me, is find the best real estate agent you can find that knows the neighborhood that you want to live in, and you'll probably be successful. Vivi, welcome back.
Thank you.
And I also have with me Andrew Stein with Colorado Legal Associates. He is an attorney. He focuses on family law and estate planning and does a little bankruptcy work and a couple of other specialties. Andrew, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
And Vivi, you wanted to jump in. Have we covered this market enough?
I think so. If anybody wants to talk more about the market, or
give them your number.
Give me a call. I'm always available to buy you a beer or a cup of coffee. You can reach me at 303-847-1868. But what I wanted to ask Andrew today is, I have an investor. He's a single male, probably late 40s, early 50s, and he wanted to, he has a lot of retirement money in 401ks and things like that, and he really wanted to diversify. And so he called me and asked me to help him start picking up rentals that had good cash flow. And we have him under contract for a condo in Capitol Hill. Cash flows 18% a month. He's pretty happy with it. And his question to me was, do I keep it in my name or do I put it into an LLC? Andrew. Q.
So I'm sure there are other facts involved, and without knowing everything about his financial life and his other assets, you've mentioned 401ks and that he has other investments and wants to diversify. But I mean, generally speaking, in that situation, and you said this might be his first.
It
property.
is, right, first investment that he's going to rent out.
I mean, in that situation, it's hard to go wrong with the LLC. He would get the limited liability that the name suggests. It's a limited liability company. And I'm not a tax attorney, and he's welcome and probably should consult one down the road, but it also will have the single, it'll have those tax benefits that he might not find in other business entities. And then hopefully I'm sure you'll do an excellent job for him, and he'll want to continue buying houses, and he'll be successful, and he can either continue to create LLCs, or he can have this LLC owning others. But generally speaking, the LLC is going to be the direction to go in for the situation you described.
And would you suggest having a different LLC for each property, or would you say it's more capped on maybe the amount of what the property's worth? Like you should only have up to maybe $500,000 worth of property in an LLC, or?
Boy, Vivi.
Does it really? It probably depends on each case.
There's a lot going on, but what's one of the other great things about an LLC beyond some of the protections and tax benefits are how easy they are to create for an attorney, and so I don't see a problem with continuing to create an LLC for each property.
And I know that I've had some investors just get online and go create an LLC under the state business directory. What would you tell people who are just spending $50 doing that online, opposed to having a lawyer write up their LLC? Are there a lot of pitfalls? Or
there aren't as many pitfalls as there might be in many areas of law, but it is always a good idea, and it's not. Lawyers can be expensive, and they can bill a ton an hour sometimes. But when we're talking about forming an entity, it makes sense to consult an attorney. You could probably even find an attorney who'll do free consultations. We'll do free consultations at Colorado Legal Associates, and it makes sense. It's not worth trying to avoid a couple of $100 or $1,000 and then ending up with bigger problems later. But for a single member LLC for one investment property, I'm not going to say someone couldn't do it on their own by using the Colorado Secretary of State website, but it just makes more sense to consult an attorney, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, I would agree. I've actually had a client who got into business with another person. They were doing all the work on a property, and the other guy was doing the cash, and they made this agreement that they were going to split the profits, and they did their own LLC, and the person who did all the work ended up getting
and that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
If the person is on their own and they're buying,
right.
But as soon as you need to do an operating agreement and really
don't do it on your own. I've seen it.
I agree.
Not go well.
Yeah, I think there's too many variables in that situation, particularly if you've got one guy who is doing all the work, which probably means he's incurring all the expense on that situation.
Right.
And you get to the point where you're divvying up the profit, and that expense bucket seems to disappear somehow.
We see more people coming in our office who have been the victim of not having created a good company or contract or whatever the case may be, rather than those coming in to get it done right at the beginning, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, you get it done right at the beginning. You don't see them on the other end of the transaction.
Good contract will avoid those problems.
And I'm assuming that's a little less expensive to do that right up front.
It really is.
Than litigate it further down the line.
That's when the ridiculous hourly wages and things like that happen, which, by the way, Colorado Legal Associates doesn't charge ridiculous hourly wages, but many lawyers do.
Right. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to ask about investors in LLC, because that's a consistent question that I'm always getting. And I had another interesting call just this week, actually 2 days ago. A client who I helped her buy her first home a few years ago, called me, and her father, sadly, is dying. She doesn't think he's going to last more than a month. And he lives in Oklahoma. and he does not have a will. And she is the youngest of 3 children of his. He is divorced, so not currently married. She called me and said, so what happens to his estate? And I was like, well, you need to talk to a lawyer, but from what I understand, if there's no will, it goes to probate.
Well, so, and those are really good questions, and I think they're very important questions. Unfortunately, I can't talk too much about Oklahoma law,
Right.
Or at all. But I can tell you that probate is what would happen if nothing is going on, and then each state has its own laws regarding where your assets go or how they pass. If you do not have a will, and that's called if you die intestate. So I think it's an extremely important question for your friend to ask, and I'm sorry she has to go through this, but her father needs to speak with an attorney in Oklahoma, or she does, on his behalf, and start getting into all of those documents that will not just make everything easier, possibly avoid probate, possibly avoid awful tax ramifications. But what's really kind of important is just that his wishes are followed. And without a will, who knows what Oklahoma's state laws are regarding dying without a will. And why not create a situation where after a life of work, your assets and your belongings go where you want them to go?
Absolutely. So let's say he lived in Colorado.
Now we're talking.
Okay. So he is not of sound mind. So they are past the point. He didn't do what he should have done prior to getting ill. And I think we all have this thing, oh, we're going to live forever. Nothing's ever going to happen.
Absolutely.
And my last transaction coordinator actually is in the hospital. She's 40 years old. I don't even know what happened, but I'm sure she never thought at 40 years old she'd be in ICU and not breathing on her own. And I'm sure she doesn't have a will.
Yeah.
And so,
I've got that story myself. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you do. And, at what point can we get everybody to get in and do a will? And with this guy, if he was living in Colorado, what would happen to
and that's a very interesting question, although I heard several questions. So, again, just like with the real estate situation, if you've got everything in place the right way, it certainly makes all of the different possibilities easier, or the eventualities. So, of course, a large part of what we do when we're drafting estate documents is to create medical and regular power of attorneys, and almost every document I draft will discuss the eventuality of someone being incapacitated, mentally or physically incapacitated. So I mean, the point is, when should people go out and get one? I mean, I don't think too many high school kids or 20-year-olds maybe need this to happen, but as soon as you're getting into your 30s, or if you're married, or if you have children, certainly when you've gotten a house because of Vivi's excellent representation of you, that's a great time to start looking at it. But once you are incapacitated, it's an interesting question, and you really do want to consult an attorney. And let the attorney know more about the specific facts, but it wouldn't be done through some of the documents we're talking about, because we would now probably be moving into more of a guardianship situation, because really, as far as a will, as far as a medical power of attorney, a living will, or as far as a regular power of attorney, the individual would have to have capacity to be able to get those done. And that's why it's so important to get those done. If her father lived here, it's not like there's nothing that can be done. It's just you would have to consult an attorney and look in a different direction.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say, from my experience, there is so many intricacies in that process. I thought I was fairly well covered. I lost my wife a year ago, and unexpectedly, and got through it fairly well. But some of the things that I should have had reviewed by an attorney came back to catch me when my house wasn't vested properly due to a transfer that happened that changed our vesting. There was a number of things that had I had an attorney review all of those documents on a regular basis would have made that life and that process so much easier.
Right.
So I highly recommend you don't know when these situations happen. It happened to me unexpectedly. I certainly did not expect to lose my wife on a vacation a year ago, but that planning process would have made my life so much easier. Andrew, give us your phone number. How do they get a hold of you guys?
Again,
Colorado Legal Associates.
Yeah, Colorado Legal Associates. You can reach me or other attorneys at 720-974-9790.
Yeah, and your firm is a broad practice firm.
Yeah, well, and they specialize in bankruptcy and handle a large volume of bankruptcy. And when I say large volume, I don't want people to think that they don't give special attention to individuals, because the truth is they do. There's only 2 attorneys there, myself and Bill Myers, and we both spend as much time and attention to our clients as we can, and we give them quite a bit of time. But again, it's 720-974-9790.
Yeah, and I think these are matters that have to get addressed. It concerns me that I see customers and friends that don't have their life covered, because I can tell you from personal experience, these events happen in your life. You don't expect them to; they just do. And please take the time. Get yourself covered so that your family's covered. It's the right thing to do for them. I'll also encourage you, give the show a call if you need further advice. 720-515-1818. 720-515-1818. We're going to come back and we're going to help you to figure out if you're really married and don't know it. This is such a great question. Come on back. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Denver. We're taking a little different tack today. I'm your host, Tom Souther. I want to encourage you, please call us. You can text, you can email. Well, don't email to that phone number. Phone number, you can leave us a message. It's off air. We will get back to you, and I can put you together with our guests. Let me give you the number, 720-515-1818, 720-515-1818. Am I having an exceptionally high ADD day today?
I think you're doing great.
I think you're doing fine.
It seems like it. Gosh, let's keep track of one thought at a time. Anyway, I do encourage you to call us. I'd love to put you together with our guests, 720-515-1818, 720-515-1818. And our guests are Vivi Gloriod from Cherry Creek Properties, real estate agent, and I can't recommend her services highly enough. She does such a fantastic job getting to know her customers and what makes them tick and what really makes them happy and what's the right property for them, whether that's buying their forever home or their first time home or an investment property. And she buys and manages properties herself, so she knows that space really well, particularly in the Denver marketplace, Denver proper. I also have Andrew Stein with Colorado Legal Associates. Attorney, thank you.
Thank you.
And we teased you with the concept of, are you really married and don't know it? Maybe you're living with a significant other, or there's so many ways I think that common law and being married, particularly in a state like Colorado, can happen and not happen. And I thought it'd be an interesting discussion, because sometimes that really plays into real estate holdings and what happens when a partner dies unexpectedly, or who knows, you break up. So let's jump into that. Are you married and don't know it? Who wants to jump off this cliff?
I have in this day and age, what I'm finding, especially with my younger clients, is that people are not getting married as often as 20 years ago. And I have a lot of clients that are living with their boyfriend or girlfriend and are not getting married. And my question is, if they're living together and if they're buying real estate together and they're doing all the things that a married couple do, then are they considered married?
Yeah.
Or
And we live in a state, Colorado, where it is much different than most of the states, and you really can be married for all intents and purposes, legally and otherwise, by common law here. And I don't know if I've encountered an area of law where so many people have an opinion of what common law marriage is, and that unfortunately it is almost always not correct in what that definition is. So, I mean, it's not complicated, the law anyway. I mean, getting further into it might be. And what happens is you are common law married, which, by the way, is absolutely no different than being otherwise married in the state of Colorado. But you are married by common law if you cohabilitate, if you live with another person of the opposite sex in Colorado for now. So if you are living with another person for any amount of time, and during that time, the two of you decide or have an agreement to be married, and that's all that's required. So what happens is it becomes a little bit unclear whether or not, whether or not that agreement has been made. But that's all it requires, is living with someone else and agreeing to be married.
So if you agree to that in the privacy of your own home, are you still common law?
Right. So and you are. Right. But what happens is a number of things will come up where someone ends up, because who cares if this doesn't get challenged or if someone isn't disagreeing with the other person about the state of their relationship. So it comes up when there are children involved and they want to separate, and one of them says, well, I need child support or maintenance, which in Colorado, spousal support is called maintenance. Or it comes up when they want to leave and they are fighting over property, or, they have entered into a real estate deal. There are a number of reasons why the issue could come up. If these two people live together, it doesn't matter if they spend the rest of their lives happy and that's that. So when there is a disagreement about whether or not two people are married by common law or whether they are not married by common law, they look at a couple of things to see if the courts, that is, will look at a few different factors to determine whether or not there was this agreement or meeting of the minds. And that's when you get into things like, do they file their taxes together? If they are saying they're married on this federal document that you aren't supposed to lie on, then maybe that's an indication.
Would that be a lie?
Really? that others aren't supposed to.
Well, what if they buy real estate?
I think that's a very good point. Yeah.
If they buy real estate together and they're living together, would they be considered married or not?
So that in itself would certainly not mean they're married, because they would have to have an agreement or a meeting of the minds. But that real estate deal is certainly going to be something that the courts will look at as additional evidence that maybe they are agreeing to be married. The big ones are really whether or not they hold themselves out as married. And that question is, if two people living together are at a party and one of them introduces the other to another friend at the party, if they say, hey, this is my husband, this is my wife, versus this is my boyfriend or this is my friend, that's really an important factor. But if you put together a bunch of other pieces, like owning property together, filing their taxes together, sharing. Does Blockbuster still exist? A Blockbuster card together? Those things.
I don't know that it does.
I don't know what that would go to.
I think they have little bitty stores now, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Gosh, we love tangents. Exactly. Next week, the status of video stores in the
but and just because there are some parts of this that are important, I want to say that what I think is so important about it is, if you are married by common law, then you are married. It means that you do need to file your taxes jointly as married. It means you do need to get a divorce if you separate from each other. It means that the individual who's in a position to receive child support needs to receive that child support, because it's the right of the child. And if it's appropriate for spousal support or maintenance to be awarded, all of that needs to happen. So it's pretty important to decide whether or not you are married or not.
So I think what I'm hearing is I should always, from this point forward, introduce at parties my significant other as that person I live with.
We'll see how they feel about
versus wife or other, to avoid the common law.
But then you might not avoid the fight later.
Well, it might be the fight.
Right.
It might be. Well, I think there's probably a closer term of endearment than that.
But what if you disagree about it? Let's say there's two people that have lived together for 2 years, and of course I'm thinking of somebody I know right now, and they broke up, and it wasn't a nice one. One person wanted it, the other person didn't. What if the person who didn't want it says, "Hey, she called, we're married, to make it difficult.
And that's the only way, Vivi, that it does ever come up, because if both of them agree that they weren't married, then no one's ever going to be needing to look into it. So it's when there's a disagreement after a breakup. So the question is looking back at the relationship and saying, did we agree to be married during the relationship? And
did we represent ourselves as being married?
Exactly. That's when you look at whether or not we represented ourselves as being married. That's when you look into whether or not we filed our taxes jointly, how invested together, had bank accounts together. It's when there is a disagreement that you have to, or that the courts will eventually look back. And you guys are welcome to come into our office. I do a lot of this stuff, and I'm happy to talk to people who are confused about it or want to know how better to be married or not be married.
And that number for Colorado Legal Associates, again, 720-974-9790, 720-974-9790. To reach Andrew Stein at Colorado Legal Associates.
That is the number.
Well, this is such an interesting topic, and I think we could probably spend another segment here on this with maybe how do we avoid it? If you are dead set to make sure that you're not going to be deemed married at some point in your life, what are the steps that you need to do to take that on? I'm going to leave that dangling in your head for a minute, because we're going to have to exit this second segment pretty quickly here. But I think that's an interesting topic, because I think so many people are probably a little concerned.
They don't know.
They don't know.
No. I mean, most of my clients who are living together and are not married don't honestly know if they're common law married or not.
No, and they're terrified about it.
Yeah, they'd rather just ignore it. They're like, we're just not going to talk about it.
All right. You're listening to Real Estate Radio Denver here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Come right back. We'll have more. Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Denver. I'm your host, Tom Souther, and we're off on a new track today. We're a little less real estate and a little more life, which is kind of fun. And I have two fantastic guests. I have Vivi Gloriod with Cherry Creek Properties. Vivi, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And Andrew Stein, attorney with Colorado Legal Associates. And we've been talking about, welcome, Andrew.
Well, thank you.
And we've been talking about, are you really married and don't know it? And I think that's a topic that a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but people who aren't married, haven't gone through that process, sometimes struggle with, because common law is a unique entity here in Colorado that is fairly easy, I think, to get to. And it's kind of fun to have that discussion, because sometimes it affects the real estate transaction, and that's what we're about here. So we're going to tie it in that way, even if maybe it isn't, but that's okay.
Right. And I was going to talk about a specific couple right now that we're looking to find them a home. They've been living together for 5 years. And they're darling cute. I think they're great.
They're married then.
They're not. They've never. I asked them.
Does darling cute make you married?
Yes.
Vivi's perception.
Yes.
Darling cute.
I do not. I would not call them married, although they easily could be married. They just said that they're not sure that they want to do the whole institutional. I think that's a common thing now for the younger kids. They don't want to be
breaking the mold.
Yes, they're going to change it all by not actually getting married. But they did find a house, and they wrote on it together, and they did joint tenancy. So when I do my real estate contracts, there's 3 different ways that people can hold real estate. If they hold it by themselves, it's a tenant and severalty. And then the other 2 ways, if 2 people are purchasing it, you can buy it joint tenancy, which means if one person dies, the other person would receive the house. Or tenants in common, which means however you want to split it up, between 2 people, tenants in common, one person would have their portion, one person would have their portion. If one person died, it really depends whatever their will says. So,
which, by the way, goes to probate if you don't have the will.
Right, exactly.
Which I found out the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah, Tom just dealt with that last year. Yeah. So Steve and Daphne asked me, they said, should we do tenants in common or joint tenancy? And I explained the 2 differences. And I said, really, how do you want to do it? And Daphne said, well, I would rather, if something happens to me, I'd rather Steve have the house. And Steve said, if something happens to me, I'd rather have Daphne have the house.
Joint tenancy it was.
Joint tenancy it was. But then at the end of the day, is that going to make them married if they break up?
That's the question, Andrew Stein with Colorado Legal Associates. Does that matter?
I'm glad I didn't bet that this was going to be a will question. But it is incredible how much interaction there is between a lot of these issues, because that, the tenants in common is a situation where the will makes it so important to have it pass where you want it to. But so no, just in fact, from what you said about the couple, I really could confidently tell you that they're not married, and it's not because of anything having to do with joint tenancy or how darling and cute they might be, but they both are saying that we don't believe in marriage as an institution, that we're young and hip and don't think we should be labeled. So the second either of them says that, they're not married. No matter how many years they've been together or how many kids they have or how many joint tenancy properties they share, they're not married because they don't believe in marriage. So, the second either of them changes that story, then maybe people will start looking back to property and things like that. But as long as everyone in the situation you're describing tells the truth would be that they did not have a meeting of the minds to be married, that on the contrary, they both agreed that they weren't going to be married. And so until that agreement changes, that couple is clearly not married, and the property won't make a difference.
Okay, now I'm going to throw another wrench in it, though. When I call, Steve says, hold on, let me talk to the wife.
Ooh.
That's a big one. I mean, really, that might be one of the biggest factors we look at to determine whether or not there's a meeting of the minds. So if that's the way both of them are talking, and they're also saying we're not married, then it really would be a question for a court to decide. If it was me and I am not wearing a robe, and listeners have to understand.
How about house slippers?
Not wearing socks, but and listeners have to know that I'm not the one that makes the decision. It ultimately would be a judge. But I would also say they weren't married in that situation, because semantics, using terminology that we use like husband and wife, while that's great evidence that you're married in itself, as soon as they explain that they're not married, I think it becomes clear that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a little sidebar here, because since we've gone here into joint tenancy and tenants in common, because I want to warn people, because this happened to me when my wife died, and she did not have a will. She did not have a large estate, so it wasn't a big, huge deal, right up to the point that we had issued done a quitclaim deed on our house, which many people do. They transfer ownership, they add people, they take people off. Mm-hmm. What I did not know in Colorado is that a quitclaim deed, unless specifically tenancy or ownership is expressed explicitly in that quitclaim deed, it defaults to tenants in common. So the ownership of our home did not transfer to me upon her death, which I expected it to, and was a little bit miffed that it did not. So if you've issued a quitclaim deed, written a quitclaim deed on your home, and because of a refinance or something over the last years, you might want to talk to Andrew Stein at Colorado Legal Associates to make sure that you are vested correctly and that your will is going to execute the way you want it to, even if you have these documents in place. Because that one document, that quitclaim deed, changed and forced me to file probate for that property, which was a pain in my rear.
I was going to say, can you tell the audience what probate is like?
It was a process I did not want to do. There was not a lot in grieving and the whole thing over an error on a quitclaim deed that, now I know the difference. Yeah. And, again, contact Andrew at 720-974-9790. These are issues.
And it's not just limited to whether or not a quitclaim, although I agree that that's a really good situation to come talk to us. But even if you are a joint tenancy owner of property with another, yes, it's true that the property will pass upon death without probate. But what happens when the spouse passes? What happens if one of the spouses Yeah, so even if it's joint tenancy, and I tell people that they don't necessarily have to take advantage of some of the other things we do with our trusts or put the property in the name of a trust in order to avoid probate, because it's in joint tenancy, it's going to pass. But then what happens when the surviving spouse passes? Again, we want that property to go where the surviving spouse wants it to go.
Yeah, we could have both gone, and it would have been a huge mess.
Yeah.
As far as where those properties were. So, let's. Have we gone through the?
Yeah, I keep thinking.
the
I sadly was victim of divorce back in 2008, and I'm glad to be out from underneath that particular relationship. But what I realize is, I have a will out there with an ex-husband, and I have never updated it. And it's frightening to think if I step out of the station and get hit by a car and die, that this man would receive everything I've worked so hard for.
So the audience might not be able to see me handing Vivi my card, but that is another
good indicator that you need to make a phone call.
So, it basically, since I haven't updated my will, if something does happen to me, it's just going to go to the last will that was written. Correct?
That's absolutely true. We would, and it's not a difficult process for me or another attorney to create a codicil or an amendment to your will or a new will. And maybe there's some other documents that would help you out, especially since you're growing as an investor and hopefully have tons of assets at some point. So yeah, I would love it if you came into the office, and you certainly should change that will.
Yeah, I need to do it before I leave and get in my car.
I was going to say.
You can't leave the building. Here, we're going to give you a blank piece of paper.
Right. Wrap me in bubble wrap until we can get together.
That's a whole nother...
So if we were to talk about just estate planning for people, and what would be your advice? Maybe the top 5 things they need to do to avoid probate, or need to get in to see you, the things they need to really address with a professional.
That's a good question. And I handle trusts and estates for people who don't have $6 or $7 million estates. I'm happy to.
And that's a great statement, because people, you think wills and trusts, and you think, man, I've got to have $1 million, or I got to have $10 million. But I think if you have kids,
I think if you have a house, and we've talked about a lot of situations for people, I mean, for even less than $1 million. And then hopefully we all hope that, our assets will grow and our wealth will grow. And then it's even maybe more important. But yeah, to avoid probate and just what we do to help people so that they don't have to deal with a lot of possible issues later is we draft a simple will so that they can express and let their desires be known, so that their property will pass where they want it to go. And then we also do a couple of other documents. We spoke about capacity earlier. So some of the documents we do are the will that I mentioned, a power of attorney, so that financial documents and things can be handled on behalf of the deceased or incapacitated. And then there's also what's called a medical power of attorney, or a living will, where when something terrible happens, or when, it's an awful thing to talk about, but if you're in a vegetative state, we just want to make sure your wishes are clear as far as that situation goes. And then the only other document I like to draft to help things move smoothly is something called a trust. And it's a trust that allows you to put your property in that trust's name in order to avoid probate and certain tax-related issues when in the eventuality that we all die. So it's not as complicated as it sounds. I do the work, so you don't even need to worry about how complicated it is. And the Colorado Legal Associates doesn't charge an outrageous amount of money. It really is an affordable process, and it's just 3 or 4 documents for a husband and wife or an individual that will really make the future. A lot of the problems that might come up, we can help avoid those.
A question on the trust bit. My father is very savvy, and he does not like giving the government $1 more than he is supposed to. Although he was audited about 6 years ago, and it turned out that the government owed him $24. So I'm hoping I'm gonna ride those coattails and hope that they know that last name Gloriod, that we do not skip out on our taxes. But he did do. He created a trust for myself and my sister, and he's been putting different assets in the trust. And I think he did that before December of 2012 because there was a cap that happened, something, I don't know. I really don't know a lot about it. But if I already have a trust that my father has put in place, can I create another trust to put my properties in?
And that's exactly what I will do if you come into the office.
I will.
That's
I'm
right.
coming in to see you.
Yeah, your father has been very smart, and maybe I think the two purposes we're talking about here are not giving the government pennies that you don't have to, while certainly giving them what they have a right to, and avoiding the situations like we heard Tom talking about, where he had to it could have been avoided that he had to deal with probate. So yeah, you would still want to create a trust for yourself.
Okay.
So, interesting show today. We've gone off on some great areas, and I think great advice. You need to have yourself covered. You need to have your family covered. I encourage you, call Andrew Stein, Colorado Legal Associates at 720-974-9790. Get some help, and come back next week. We're going to have a great show for you. Thanks for listening.